Final Fantasy XVI. Whether you love it or hate it, there's no denying that it is a controversial part of Final Fantasy's history. After what many fans considered to be a long slump for the series, Final Fantasy XVI was supposed to be the game that put the name back on top. But whether or not it achieved that goal depends on who you ask. Perhaps the most controversial part of the game is the gameplay. If you've read almost any comment section related to this game, then you probably already know that one of the most controversial parts of Final Fantasy XVI is its gameplay. While many fans wish for a return to the classic ATB or turn-based battle system, Final Fantasy XVI abandons both of them in pursuit of a more action-based gameplay experience. While there's no denying that the end product was a very well-made one, many fans felt left behind by this decision, as they wished for a Final Fantasy that more closely resembled that of the Super Nintendo or PlayStation 1 era. Another part of the gameplay that's controversial is the difficulty. Among your first playthrough, no matter what difficulty you choose, the game is going to end up being a lot easier than, say, a Souls-like game. In fact, for many gamers, the game is almost effortless in terms of difficulty.
Oh, and when you go crying to your mistress, tell her it was Leon who gave you the pounding. Use all the dirty tricks you want, Randy. You alright? So you know one end of a
Now, on a second playthrough, you do unlock an option called Final Fantasy Mode that might address this issue for some. However, the first playthrough is one of the most special to many people, and so not having an option for a higher difficulty the first time around is something that understandably left many fans frustrated. What I will say is that Final Fantasy XVI has a very unique take on summons, allowing each one that you acquire to affect your gameplay in different ways, give you different skills to use, and even allowing you to mix and match those skills with other summons once you master them. I personally found this element to be a really interesting addition to Final Fantasy XVI's gameplay. Having 3 different summons that you can draw power from at once really made the gameplay feel fast and fluid. On top of that, you have your Limit Break, an ability that envelops Clive in flames and allows you to attack the enemy with increased power for a limited time. Limit Break also gradually restores Clive's health. Now, while the battles are perhaps a little bit too easy for some, they are also very grand and very well put together, at least in a cinematic way. The set pieces feel so massive, and the scenes feel like something straight out of an action movie most of the time. The transition between gameplay and cutscene during a boss battle is seamless, and you never feel out of the action for even a second. The gameplay also takes steps to refresh itself from time to time, having you do things like fight a boss in the middle of the air or play as Ifrit from time to time. I'm not saying that this is common. 90% of the time you'll be playing as Clive, but there are special situations and select boss fights that give you a nice change up from the normal pace of gameplay. Whether or not the side quests are good depends on who you ask. The side quest offers some very good story content, however, they are very, very linear. That's not to say they aren't fun. I actually quite enjoyed them. I'm just saying that when it comes to the side quests, don't expect any in-depth puzzle solving. The thing about the gameplay is that I think that it's something that everyone is going to get something different from. Personally, I thought it was great because I liked the fun gameplay regardless of how difficult it was. But other people are going to feel gypped because the game is not nearly as hard as many would expect from an RPG. In fact, many would hardly even call it an RPG because of how linear it is. The term action game with RPG elements fits it much better, to be completely honest. That said, if you love a fast-paced hack and slash game with lots of linear gameplay, then you will love Final Fantasy XVI. It is one of the best hack and slash games to come out on the PlayStation 5 so far.
Final Fantasy XVI has one of the most unique and detailed stories in the entire franchise, overflowing with a rich history and lore that would make J.R.R. Tolkien himself proud, and a roster of characters large enough to fill Middle-earth. Final Fantasy XVI has found its place among the great titles of gaming. Going back to the roots of the franchise, the game is set in a pseudo-medieval European world, only this time, the game's setting and lore leans more heavily into that era than past games, with the geopolitical and religious factions and empires being near carbon copies of the Holy Roman Empire and the British Empire during their respective reigns. Historians and lovers of the medieval period and medieval literature, like myself, will have a field day sifting through the lore and history of Valisthea, the Catholic-like religion of Grigor and the Mother Crystals, and of course, pages upon pages of monsters, beasts, dragons, and carnivorous plants that will keep a monster hunter occupied for days. In keeping with the old world European feel, the story is as grand and epic as the environment is large and encompassing. The story of Final Fantasy XVI, written by, and forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Kazutoyo Maihiro, follows Clive Rossfield, the son of Archduke Elwyn Rossfield, living his life in exile after the supposed death of his younger brother and the overthrow of his father's kingdom. Clive at first becomes the unwilling member of a band of outlaw freedom fighters led by Sidolphus Telemann. Over the course of the story and his reunion with his childhood friend Jill Warwick, Clive becomes as zealous of a fighter for freedom as Sid, traveling through the kingdoms of Valisthea, freeing the enslaved bearers and wreaking havoc among his many enemies. But, as with most Final Fantasy stories, Final Fantasy XVI isn't that straightforward, and the freeing of the bearers is only a subplot in the grand scheme of things, but still a deeply important and integral subplot. The overarching story of Final Fantasy XVI follows Clive on a revenge quest to kill the monster who killed his younger brother when they were kids. The focus of the plot quickly changes to involve finding Clive's brother and destroying the Mother Crystals along the way, all while Clive fights an ever-growing internal battle with a dark otherworldly entity called Ultima. Unlike most other ARPGs, most of the side quests in Final Fantasy XVI are integral to the character development of a number of main players and side characters throughout the story. There are your standard fetch quests and monster hunter quests, but even those feel genuine to the lore for the characters involved. If you're a completionist or a side quest junkie, then don't sleep on the side quests for this game. They are fun, many have some heavy storylines, and you get some good prizes from them.
The graphics in Final Fantasy XVI are amazing. This, of course, is to be expected, being a PlayStation 5 exclusive, but it's always nice to have that extra bit of detail added over other games in a system's library. And Final Fantasy XVI can stand alongside games like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart as one of the generation-defining games when it comes to graphics. The amount of sheer detail in the world, whether it be the sands of the desert or the light peeking through the trees in the forest. At times, it almost felt like I was playing a CGI cutscene. Now, of course, there is a notable difference between talking to an NPC and an actual cinematic cutscene, but the game never looked notably bad, and there was certainly never any time that I was thinking, wow, they really could have done a lot better. It's safe to say that Final Fantasy XVI makes excellent use of the PlayStation 5's hardware. One of the most notable examples of the game's advanced graphics are during the icon battles. It looks like something straight out of a CGI movie. It's really amazing.
Just like the story, the music of Final Fantasy XVI, composed by, and once again forgive me if I mispronounce his name, Masayoshi Soken, will totally transport you into another world. The soundtrack is by far the best Final Fantasy soundtrack I've had the pleasure of listening to since the Final Fantasy games 7 and 10. From majestic choral pieces, to the fast-paced orchestral movements, to the slow, melodic solo piano interludes, the soundtrack boasts a full orchestra, choir, and even some light rock from time to time. Each musical piece fits the tone, setting, and emotional weight of the respective scene they play in, using a wide variety of instruments and styles that pull you even further into the action, and will either hype you up to the 10th degree during a boss fight, such as the sweeping violins of To Sail Forbidden Seas, and the classically composed choir-led Ascension, or bring you nearly to tears during a poignant moment, such as the cascading piano solos in My Lady or Acceptance. Uplifting, dark, quiet, epic, the game's soundtrack is the icing on the cake to this modern Final Fantasy masterpiece, and is in my top 10 favorite video game soundtracks of all time. It's sure to become a part of any gamer's soundtrack playlist, or make the perfect background music for a D&D session.
Overall, Final Fantasy XVI can be summed up as a very good hack-and-slash game that is linear but well made, and has a story that is memorable even compared to the rest of the Final Fantasy series. It might not have been what all the fans were hoping for, but the end product was one of extreme quality, and if it's not your cup of tea, that's okay. But I truly think that Final Fantasy XVI will make a mark on many people who do decide to give it a chance. That's all for today, and lastly, I want to give a huge shout out to MaddoxWorks for helping me with this video. Like me, she is also getting her YouTube channel off the ground, and she makes very similar content to me, so if you like what I do, you'll probably like what she does. Do me a favor and give us both a like and subscribe. Thank you guys so much.
Cloud!